Hey everyone, welcome back to Singularity. I'm so glad you're here today because we're diving into one of the most epic rivalries in sci-fi history, the X-Wing versus the TIE Fighter from Star Wars. These two iconic starfighters couldn't be more different, and it's not just about who's got the cooler paint job. Though, let's be real, the X-Wings got some style points. It's all about the tech, the power, and how they stack up in a dogfight. So, buckle up, because we're going deep into their engines, energy sources, and what makes them tick. Plus, we'll tie it all back to some real-world science that's pretty mind-blowing. Let's start with the X-Wing, the Rebel Alliance's go-to fighter. This thing is a beast, and a big part of that comes down to its power systems. The X-Wing's got fusial thrust engines, a fusion reactor, fusion rockets, and, depending on which part of the lore you're digging into, sometimes even a warp drive. That's a lot of fusion going on. The fusion reactor is the heart of it all, pumping out insane amounts of energy to power everything. Those fusial engines give it the speed and maneuverability to zip through space, while the fusion rockets kick in for that extra punch when it's time to outrun a star destroyer or blast through a blockade. And if we're talking warp drive, that's the hyperspace tech letting it jump across the galaxy. All that energy doesn't just keep the X-Wing moving, it feeds into its strong laser cannons and deflector shields too. This ship's built to take a hit and dish it right back. Now, if you've been with Singularity for a while, you might remember our last video where we broke down fusion rockets. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out after this. It's a wild ride. We talked about how fusion rockets work by fusing atomic nuclei together, releasing massive energy in the process. That's what makes them so powerful in theory for the X-Wing. So when you see an X-Wing shrug off a few laser blasts or melt through TIE fighters with those red laser bolts, that's the fusion tech at work. It's a total powerhouse. But then we've got the TIE Fighter, the Empire's signature swarm ship. TIE actually stands for Twin Ion Engine, which is a totally different vibe from the X-Wing's fusion madness. These things are sleek, fast, and everywhere in the Star Wars universe, but they're not exactly brimming with power. The TIE Fighter's energy comes from two big solar panels, those giant hexagonal wings you see on either side. They soak up solar energy from nearby stars and convert it into power for the twin ion engines. That's the core of how it moves. The ion engines work by ionizing a propellant, usually some kind of gas, then accelerating those charged particles out the back with electromagnetic fields. It's a simple concept, but it's got its own strengths and weaknesses. Here's how it breaks down. Ion engines don't give you a ton of thrust. Compared to the X-Wing's fusion rockets, the TIE's engines are pretty weak in terms of raw push. But what they lack in power, they make up for in efficiency and agility. Because the thrust is low, TIE fighters can't afford heavy armor or shields. Those solar panels and lightweight frames mean they're built for speed and dodging, not tanking hits. That's why you see them zipping around like angry wasps in the movies, relying on numbers and quick maneuvers to overwhelm the enemy. One good shot from an X-Wing's lasers, though, and a TIE's toast. No shields, no second chances. Now let's bring this into the real world for a second, because ion engines aren't just sci-fi. They're real and they're awesome. The mechanism is pretty close to what we see in TIE fighters. You take a propellant like xenon gas, ionize it with electricity, and shoot those ions out the back to generate thrust. The catch? Just like in Star Wars, the thrust is super low. We're talking about the force of a sheet of paper pushing against your hand. That's it. But here's the cool part. Ion engines are crazy efficient. They use way less fuel than chemical rockets. And over time, that gentle push builds up to some serious speeds. That's why they're perfect for long missions, where you don't need a big burst of power right away. In fact, real ion engines have powered some of the farthest-reaching deep space probes we've ever launched. Take NASA's Dawn spacecraft. It used ion propulsion to visit the asteroid belt and study Vesta and Ceres. Then there's the Deep Space One mission, which tested ion tech back in the late 90s and flew by a comet. And don't forget Japan's Hayabusa missions, which used ion engines to snag asteroid samples and bring them back to Earth. These probes don't need the brute force of a fusion rocket. They're all about that slow, steady burn, getting farther than anything else we've sent out there. So, while the TIE Fighter's twin ion engines might seem weak next to an X-Wing, the concept's got some serious cred in real space tech. So where does that leave us in the X-Wing versus TIE Fighter debate? On one hand, the X-Wing's fusion-powered muscle gives it the edge in a straight-up fight: lasers, shields, and raw speed. On the other, the TIE Fighter's ion engines and solar setup make it a nimble, cost-effective swarm fighter. It's quality versus quantity, power versus agility. In the Star Wars galaxy, it's no surprise the X-Wing usually comes out on top in a one-on-one. But a squad of TIEs can still ruin your day if you're not careful. That's the breakdown for today, but I'd love to hear what you think. Which ship's your favorite and why? And while you're at it, got any ideas for our next topic? We could dive deeper into hyperspace tech, explore real-world fusion power, or maybe tackle another sci-fi showdown. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I'm always looking for inspiration from you all. Before I sign off, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button and give it a like. It really helps the channel grow and keeps us going here at Singularity. We're all about exploring the wild edges of science and sci-fi, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Until next time, keep looking up, keep asking questions, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Singularity signing out.